Today we have a crazy story of revenge against a man who broke someone's heart. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I had my husband's work computer stolen and destroyed. When my ex-husband first got a job at the accounting firm he used to work for, he and one other employee connived to defraud a client. The said client is a big-time celebrity, and the firm took care of his finances and made sure his numbers were right. My ex-husband and this employee stole from the client because they knew he was never going to notice. He didn't just have a lot of money, he was also a very carefree person, and cared very little about his money. Also because he was making lots of it, I think. While they knew that the client may never notice, they also knew that the firm might notice. So they did some stuff to cover their tracks. After they did it, his partner in crime went back on their agreement and went away with 70% of the money. He got married to a woman from another country, took the money with him, and fled the firm and country. My ex, on the other hand, felt very guilty about what he'd done, and out of guilt, he dedicated time to being the best at his job. In no time, he earned the respect and recognition of the higher-ups. When all this happened, we had just gotten married, and my husband told me about it after they had done it, and his friend had run off with the money. He was visibly upset for days, but would not tell me, not until I pressured him to talk to me. He worried that I would lose my respect for him if he told me, and that was why he didn't tell me. I was disappointed in my husband. I didn't think he could do something like that, but I forgave him and promised to keep his secret. The truth is that I didn't know my husband to be a dubious or a fraudulent person. I didn't even think it was something he was capable of. So, because he hadn't shown any sign of being that kind of person, and because I didn't want to believe that he would come up with and execute such act, I blamed the other employee. I convinced myself that he only did it because the other guy made him do it. Anyway, my husband gave his all at work, trying to erase what he'd done and to avoid anyone getting suspicious. I was proud of him until one Saturday evening when my ex left the house for a walk. I wasn't new to him taking walks, but that usually happened in the morning. When he said that he was going for a walk, I was going to ask why, but I decided against it as I didn't want it to come out the wrong way. I was preparing dinner when his cell phone rang. It was just on the kitchen counter. I figured he would call the person back when he returned from his walk, but the phone rang again. I checked the caller's ID and it was a woman's name. I had never heard him mention that name. The woman called 4 more times. My ex-husband and I did not have access to each other's phones, so I couldn't snoop to see who the woman was, even if I wanted to. I could also not take her calls, so I just ignored it. When he returned, I told him that she'd called. I deliberately mentioned her name to see if I would get any reaction. I think I saw a flash of dread in his eyes, but it lasted for a few seconds before he smiled and said he would call her back. I asked who she was, and he said she's one of the temporary assistants at work. That same evening, he said he was taking the vacuum cleaner to the garage for fixing. I had told him a week earlier to fix it, and he grumbled and asked me to use the new one instead. We had a new cleaner that we'd never used, and he told me to use that instead. I just found it strange that he was deciding to fix it even though I didn't ask again. 10 minutes after he left for the garage, I went to the guest bedroom to see what he was doing. Our visitor's bedroom is close to the garage, and one can see whatever is going on in front of the garage from the windows. Not surprisingly, my ex had his tools in the vacuum cleaner, but he wasn't fixing it. He was on a phone call instead, and he appeared to be pleading with the other person. I knew that expression from the times he forgot our anniversary or forgot to buy something I'd called him about before he left the office. I knew something was going on between my husband and the temporary assistant, because I knew he had to be talking to her. She had called him more than 4 times. No one calls anyone that many times if it's not an emergency. After dinner that same evening, I asked my husband if there was a problem, and he assured me that we were fine. I didn't want to tell him that I'd seen him from the guest bedroom's window because I didn't want him to think I didn't trust him or that I had suspicions about him and didn't want to talk to him about it. Also, I could be wrong and my suspicion will cause a strain in our relationship. For weeks, my husband would go for walks in the evening. He never left his phone behind again. Whenever he returned from work, he would stay some extra minutes in his car before getting out and coming into the house. My suspicion that my husband was cheating got even stronger. I told my friend and she offered to lend me her audio recorder. She said I could slip it in his pockets whenever he went on his evening walks. I thought that would be too obvious, so I decided to keep it in his car instead. I let it sit in his car for 48 hours, after which I pretended to want something from his car and took it. When he left for work, I spent my entire day listening to him on my computer. After I was done, I wish I didn't even listen. I was right. My husband was cheating on me, and yes, it was with the woman who called him repeatedly when he went for a run. And no, she was not a temporary assistant. She had the same position as him, so they were colleagues. My friend was livid and naturally advised me to divorce my ex-husband. I told her I planned to do that, but I was going to make sure he suffered. I wasn't going to let him off so easily. She agreed, and I began to think of different ways to get back at him. A bright idea came to my mind. I was going to report what he did to the firm's client the year before. My friend and I called the firm and reported what he had done anonymously. We also lied about the woman he was seeing being involved in their fraudulent activity. My friend had insisted that she probably knew. She even added that what they all did together was probably what brought them closer and led to the beginning of their affair. For 2 weeks, I waited for my ex to tell me that the firm had called him, but I heard nothing. I started to panic and worry that they didn't take our call seriously. I had even begun to consider calling again or writing to the client. He's a famous person and his team can easily be contacted. When my husband was summoned by the firm's board, he had contributed so much to the company after his partner in crime ran that they didn't feel comfortable about just calling the police as they would normally do in case of a fraud. They wanted to be sure that he wasn't being targeted by jealous colleagues. I knew my ex very well. He was a bad liar. He lied so badly that anyone who's half smart can tell that he's lying. I'm sure the board noticed that in his defense, so they immediately commenced an investigation on him. While the investigation was ongoing, he could still go to work and do things as every other employee. My husband lived in terror for the whole week. He was a mess. I nearly felt bad for him. Just as the investigation was coming to a close, I staged a break-in and arranged for his work computer to be stolen. When the firm asked for his work computer to help with their investigation, and he told them that it had been stolen, even those who had previously stood by him stopped supporting him. Nobody believed that his computer could coincidentally become missing at the time he was being investigated for fraud. While all this happened, I pretended to stand by him while talking to a divorce lawyer. The lawyer suggested I serve him the divorce papers then, since things were not looking good for him. He said since my ex was dealing with other stuff, he would probably be too weak to fight me for a good divorce deal. He was wrong. My ex fought fiercely and became a nasty and petty human being. He never apologized for cheating, nor even felt sorry about his actions. Lucky for me, while he may have been winning with the divorce proceedings, his firm was dealing with him. They found out that he indeed connived with another person to defraud a client. He lost his credibility at the firm, and on top of that, they ordered him to pay back every penny. Never mind the fact that there were two of them, he was left to deal with the consequences alone. He wasn't imprisoned, as the whole deal was settled outside of the court, but he was neck deep in debt and could not get another job within that city. During our messy divorce proceedings, he called me on my cell phone one day, and I admitted to him that I stole his computer and reported him to the firm. I also told him about the affair. He apologized, and I apologized too. We even tried to get back together, but it just wasn't working. He could not get over what I'd done, and I couldn't get over what he'd done too. So we just decided to end things amicably. And oh, the woman he cheated with left him as soon as she heard about the fraud issue. I still think about the whole thing and wonder if I was always that petty, or if his infidelity brought out that side of me. I think it was my friend, really. I never could have been able to do those things if she hadn't encouraged me. Do I regret it? I think I do at some point, but sometimes I think I'm a complete bad butt. So the ending of the story doesn't quite stick the landing because I'm trying to use more friendly language. When it comes to trying to use a little bit more friendly words, bad butt is one of those words that's hard to find a good substitute. If anybody has any good ideas that don't sound like a squeaky level of cringe, I would love to hear. That said, with this story, the main thing that stuck in my head is OP tried to get back together with this person. They committed a very prosecutable case of fraud and then cheated on you so blatantly, and you go, yeah, I'll give him another chance. Doesn't matter if he's got a whole bunch of debt and a lot of baggage. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, my boss is a disgusting jerk who likes to assault women and got a taste of his own medicine. I, 27-year-old female, had an unforgettable encounter with a boss of mine during my newbie days at the law firm I work at. My college experience was mostly me going to class, studying after class, and the little time I had to myself I went to work. As a law student who had lots of debt and loans piled up, I couldn't afford to do normal student activities since I knew the type of family I came from. Law school was another level of intense competition. The competition was fierce mainly because there was a special opportunity awaiting the top 10 students each year where they got to work for some of the top firms and prosecutors in the city. I couldn't pass up a chance like that, so I studied hard. I wouldn't lie, it was hard. So hard that I was thinking of giving up the idea of making it as one of the top 10 students. But my mom was my biggest supporter and she was always encouraging me. So I did my best and made it into one of the biggest firms in Boston. I imagined my life after law school was going to be less stressful and I would have a social life, partying and the likes. What I wasn't prepared for was the intense work hours as a newbie at the firm. They had a stack of cases that needed to be filed accordingly and loads of papers that needed to be photocopied or documents that were needed at the court office. It was a lot of work, and my social life was practically non-existent, but the pay was good, and with the amount of student loans I had, I was willing to deal. I was under the mentorship of one of the firm's major senior partners. She was a specialized family lawyer who was a bit stuck up and rude, but boy, she had experience when it came to different cases and knew how to make her case in the courtroom. She was a big deal around and she knew it, which was one of the many reasons for my busy schedule. Clients wanted her to take their case because she had a higher success rate when it came to divorce and settlements. The problem with my mentor being too good at her job was that other lawyers working at the firm became envious and had less clients than her, so there were always different speculations, but she knew better than to focus on them. I was unaware at the time that my mentor and one of the major clients at the firm had backlashed the night before, but only realized this later in the morning when she was fired. Apparently, the client requested she get fired or he was gone, and the firm made their choice. My colleagues and I were sad by the news. Although my mentor had her flaws, she wasn't so bad when you worked closely with her. A week after she was gone, she was replaced by someone else, and I knew from the moment he walked into his office that he was going to be trouble. We had a work dinner where each of us introduced ourselves and the protocols of the office were thoroughly explained to him. Let us call him Sean. Sean decides there and then during the dinner that he wasn't going to have any inexperienced lawyer on his team. He had no time for that. It took a lot of explanations and pleading to get him to calm down. He eventually gave in to the idea on the basis that he gets to choose those he was going to train personally, which meant there was a high chance I wouldn't be working under him. I felt annoyed by his pompous attitude and was hoping he wouldn't choose me. I didn't want a boss who had a lot of drama, but turns out this man had a type. Women only. We were 5 working under our last mentor, 2 men, 3 women. But Sean decided to change the system into a women-only group. He was new, so everyone thought he was being observant in his choice, since the women he chose were all brilliant people, I included. I was working closely with Sean on a divorce settlement case that my former mentor was in the process of seeing through before she got fired, which was how I got to see Sean's character firsthand. He was a major jerk who had zero respect for anyone, including senior partners, newbies, and other colleagues at the workplace. But according to rumors, he came from a highly influential family and had issues at his former firm, but was brought in here through some sort of deal that took place between the boss and his father. There were other cases which my colleagues were working on, but this was an urgent case that was supposed to have been worked on earlier, and since I worked closely with my mentor on this case, I knew and had more knowledge about it, which was why I was being paired with Sean. At the time, we were working on getting sufficient evidence that staked claims on the husband having no choice but to pay a certain amount for settlement, so there were a lot of overnights. While I wasn't particularly thrilled about being stuck in my workplace all night, which made things worse was how uncomfortable being with Sean was. He was always being too close or handsy, or maybe he just doesn't know about personal space. I could reach out for a document on his desk, and next thing you know, he has closed in on the space between us. Or I wanted to take a glass of water, and I feel his hands running slightly against my legs. I thought I was in over my head because he never made any direct advances, and even when he made these moves, he always looked clueless, and to be honest, I was too scared to confront him about it. We finally got the evidence we needed and went to the courthouse to make a case against the husband, which was approved by the judge, so I got a chance to see Sean as an opposing party. And I hate to say it, but he was good at his job. It was obvious he knew just how well to bait a person into falling for his trap. We won the case and made a substantial amount of money for the firm, making Sean an even more needed asset in the firm. About a month later, I was on a bathroom break when I heard a couple of ladies entering the bathroom. It seemed one of my colleagues was tearing up over something that happened while the rest of the ladies consoled her. I couldn't make out all of what was being said since I was directly inside the restroom and the ladies were by the sink, but from the little I heard, the name Sean was mentioned and something about being assaulted was mentioned. That confirmed my suspicions about Sean. I did a little more digging, and it turns out almost all the female newbies who worked with him also had similar experiences. Without a doubt, I knew the reason why none of my colleagues reported or said anything about this to HR was because they were scared and knew ultimately if the firm decided on who was more valuable to them, Sean was no doubt staying while they would be out of jobs. And this was why most of my female colleagues were switching into other categories of law available. I thought about doing this too and decided to freak it. I was too invested in family law to change sides because of a man who had zero respect for women and believed he could do anything and get away with it. I was left to deal with not only loads of work, but also Sean's unbearable attitude during the day and his disgusting habit at night. It was beginning to get to me. On a certain work night, I couldn't stand his usual misconduct and made an outburst about not being a doll he could toy with. And he didn't even try to play dumb. He confidently responded with a sick grin on his face, "What are you going to do about it?" I decided I wasn't going to deal with this anymore, and I needed to find a way out. I was so mad I needed someone to rant to. Then it occurred to me to give my former mentor a call and set up a meeting with her. The next day we met up and I explained my situation to her. She wasn't a bit surprised at what I said, mainly because she knew Sean. They went to the same college and he was a well-known jerk who was just good at his job and had daddy's money for support. We both crossed out the idea of reporting him. We knew he would be out of jail within a week, and after a lot of thinking, a brilliant plan was formed. So apparently Sean wasn't originally into family law. He began as a criminal lawyer whose first case had to do with a murderer who was on trial, and Sean was asked to defend him in court, which took a different turn when the murderer was sentenced to life and threatened Sean to watch his back. He never knows when he might strike since he had men around. This made Sean so scared he switched into a different aspect of law. The convicted murderer died not too long ago in his cell, but we decided to play the game to our advantage. The plan was to use the threat against him and force him to admit his wrongdoings and quit on his own accord. We started with simple letters using simple words like, "Quit your job," and left it in his mailbox. But when we saw he wasn't taking our threat seriously, we decided to up our game by writing letters telling him to quit his job and admit to his wrongdoings. He must have thought it was a prank or a joke of some sort because he didn't take these letters seriously. Then we decided to hint out the name of the particular murderer in the letter and wrote that the murderer asked us to pay him back in as he had promised him earlier in his career. This got his attention as we suspected it would. I could tell that from his attitude at work, we were starting to get to him. We stopped with the letter and sent messages directly into his phone mail just to spice things up a bit. He was starting to panic. During meetings, I could see him fidgeting whenever a notification popped up on his screen, and whenever he was outside, he was always watching his back. He fought back by hiring someone to track whoever was sending the text, but luckily for us, we paid a guy downtown to help us with that, and he was also able to cut off our tracks. We decided to stop with empty threats and hired someone to scare him into admitting his wrongdoings, just to incite fear in him and force him to admit to assaulting women in the workplace, and this actually worked. The next day, he came into the office to formally apologize to all the women he had in one way or another assaulted. All my colleagues who had been forced to leave his department had something to say when they were interviewed by HR. What I wasn't expecting to see were other people from other departments also being a victim of this misconduct. He was suspended from work, but since the firm knew they could be sued by their workers for this and didn't want to cause trouble, they decided to let go of him and bring back my former mentor, who not only got her job back, but a huge bonus, and I was able to learn conveniently from her. So I guess the only thing I'm curious about is, would the company have been responsible for doing any kind of litigation here? Or is their main responsibility just to fire them, let them go, and say, "We had no idea he was doing all this disgusting stuff, it's up to you guys to prosecute"? That said, it sounds like there's enough people here that it could literally become a class action lawsuit. That said, our next story is the man who broke my heart again. This man, let's call him A, had walked into my life at a point when I didn't want to give any man a chance again. Actually, A and I started off as friends who got matched by our mutual friend who felt A and I were two lonely people who needed the warmth that love brings. Truly, I was lonely, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be with anyone until I met A. I have had some experiences that have deepened my resolve to stay single for the longest time possible. When I got introduced to A, I was skeptical about getting into another relationship with a man again. But he made it look like he was a missing puzzle in my life. Even though I'd been in a relationship for more than 6 years with my ex, I had never felt such a level of commitment from the opposite sex before. I was immediately drawn to this man who was intentional about making me happy and well-loved. Here's a little background story about my life before A came along. I got pregnant when I was 19, and I genuinely wanted to keep the baby. More so, my then boyfriend felt we could just start a family together. My ex had always told me that we would get married, and I had sincerely looked forward to it with so much interest. He was my first love, and he was the sweetest person in my life then. But all of that changed when we welcomed our baby. I watched him go from sweet to being so cold and stiff. He cared less for my baby and me, and we didn't get to move into the same apartment as he had earlier promised. It was overwhelming, and I was devastated. My family took over the expenses of taking care of me and a newborn, and I could feel my heart bleed so much. As much as I tried to give my daughter the home she deserved, I had to accept that her father wasn't ready to take on the responsibilities required of him. It was difficult, but I watched my life change in the blink of an eye. Just like that, I became a single mother, and it was one of the most difficult situations I have ever had to navigate. Thankfully, I showed up strong every day, and I would not have wished for a better child other than my daughter, E. 6 years down the line, I had grown above everything that was meant to destroy me. I went ahead to get a college degree, and I was ready to take on the world, but my circle of friends thought I deserved to allow someone special into my life, considering the fact that I've stayed so long without giving love a chance. On different occasions, some of them have jokingly asked me if I want to become a nun. So, the lucky person I chose was A. Well, I chose to go on that ride with A because I wanted to, and not because my friend thought he was good for me. At first, he showed me how intentional he was about us, and he spared no effort to shower me with love, attention, and passion. As far as he was concerned, I was the queen in his life, and he couldn't wait to spend forever with me. I wasn't shocked when he asked me to be his wife within a short period of time. I wanted that too, as much as he did. Even though I had strong instincts in me to wait in order to know him better, I managed to ignore it all. Together, we made it to the altar, surrounded by friends, family, and everyone we hold dear in our hearts. I believed A when he told me in front of everyone that I would be his first and last. He told me I would never have to wonder if I was the love of his life or not, that as long as we lived, it would be our world. Truthfully, the first 2 years of our lives together was pure bliss. At least I didn't get to notice that he kept mistresses until 3 years into our marriage, where everything I felt I had built with this man came crashing down like a pack of cards. I couldn't believe that I had dated a complete pretender all along. He promised to treat me like a princess, but all I got from him was pain and disappointment. As if that were not enough, I was so shocked when he told me that he wasn't going to adopt my child. Meanwhile, he promised to do that before we got married. He literally didn't show any affection for E, and the daddy-daughter relationship he displayed while we courted was nothing but a lie. All the behavior he exhibited came as a rude shock for me because I didn't believe I had waited for 6 good years building my life alone only to end up with someone like A. I remember the first time I noticed that he was a cheat. We had gone out to a restaurant together, and I noticed the way a certain waiter kept staring at him. He, on the other hand, kept feeling so uncomfortable that he couldn't hide it. Months later, I discovered that he had dated the waiter even while he was courting me. My heart spilled when I discovered what A had been doing and who he really was, and I couldn't stop wondering why he chose me and why he chose to hurt me the way he did. Oftentimes, my friend would tease me about how I was glowing and how happy I looked. I didn't know how I managed to mask my pain and unhappiness, but I decided to play along the lines of happiness my friends generously bestowed on me. But when I was alone, I thought about how my life looked like a mirage, like a movie that I had to forcefully watch. I thought A was only a cheat, but I didn't know that he also hid some violent tendencies under his cloak. The day he hit my child was the day that I knew I was going to get back at him with everything in me. It happened when E ran into his study abruptly. He didn't like being disturbed whenever he studied, but that day, E had barged into his study seeking my presence. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, and E had stood up in anger to spank her on the jaw. According to him, E had interrupted his deep reading, and he needed to reprimand her. He claimed to have warned her several times not to shout around the house. I was in my closet trying to put my things together when I heard E scream. I raced downstairs with a certain level of swiftness I never knew I had possessed. I didn't expect the spectacle I encountered when I finally made it down. I saw A with his arms akimbo and E trying so hard to wipe away her tears, which I barely allowed myself to see. I stood there trying to take in the situation, and the next episodes that followed were shocking to even me. I took E upstairs, then I came down to hold A by the neck. I wasn't the type that liked to threaten anyone, but I found myself holding him by his shirt and warning profusely not to ever mess with my child again. I could tell that he was so shocked to see me in such a display. For the first time, I could see the fear in his eyes, and I was glad that I gave him such chills. After that scenario, A moved out of the room we had shared and he seldom interacted with me. It was funny because the few words we said to each other decreased drastically, and I didn't push for it to get better. At that point, I was tired of hiding the mess I'd gotten myself into. As much as I regretted allowing myself to be in such a mess, I found it difficult to blame my friend who introduced me to A. Even when I felt compelled to criticize her so much, I knew she wouldn't intentionally lead me into such a mess. When I made up my mind to tell my circle of friends that I was suffering and in deep pain, I realized that I had so much fear within me. For the first time, I lacked the strength to do what I knew was right for me. I felt the universe was so unfair to me, and I was just so unlucky with my love life. When the father of my child walked away from me, I had promised myself not to allow any man to trample on my feelings again. I was certain that I was going to be wiser if I decided to give love a chance again. But I guess my fate wasn't mine to decide. When I told my friends what I had gone through for the most part of my marriage, they wondered how I managed to pull up a smiling face despite all I had going on. They were so disappointed, and the friend who introduced me to A was almost inconsolable. She couldn't shake off the feeling that she got me right into that deep mess, but I managed to make her feel better. I went back home to a terrible husband and a non-existing father for my daughter. At that point, I had made up my mind to break him the same way he had done to me. I think he wasn't aware of my resolve when he decided to bring one of his numerous mistresses into our home. It happened on a wintry Saturday morning. I had gone to the gym after dropping my daughter off at my parents'. After some intense hours of workout routine, which were born out of mental exhaustion and pain, I made it back home only to see that A was home also. I wondered silently why he returned home earlier than he had said he would. He had been out of town for a couple of days, and he managed to tell me that he wouldn't be back until Sunday. When I saw his car packed, I wondered what made him come back earlier. I went upstairs with a feeling of indifference, but after hearing some giggles as I approached his room, I was curious as to the guest that he had in our home. In reflex, I flung the door open with the thought that I was only imagining things. The spectacle I saw came in like a flash. You know, seeing how A held this mystery woman in a passionate kiss and everything I saw them doing made me feel like my entire life was a dream. As much as I had some good times with A, I had never seen such glints in his eyes when we kissed, and there he was, holding on to that woman as if his life depended on it right inside our home. That spectacle took me back to the time we moved into that home when we got married. I was so excited that I giggled all around the house as we unpacked our stuff. I had truly hoped for a journey of forever with A, and there I was, standing in front of two people who were entangled in a deep web of passion, oblivious to my presence. I declared my presence with a hum, and I watched them break free from each other. I could tell that the lady was startled, and she said, "So you have a wife? Look, and you brought me here." She ran out of our room before I could give her a second look. I had no words for my husband, as that was the last time I called him that. I made it clear to him that he wasn't allowed to spend another minute in that home. I knew too well that he had nowhere to stay, but I expected him to be grateful that I gave him a chance to walk away in peace. So I'm definitely not trying to blame OP, especially because situations are difficult to just up and change. And what I mean by that is expecting him to up and move out when you find out that he is cheating or sleeping around or just being this awful abusive monster might not be the easiest thing if both of your incomes is what's keeping that house even a livable possibility. But it also does kind of feel like, to some degree, allowing him to get away with this and not challenging him to just get out of your life as soon as possible was almost inviting a situation like this to happen. I mean, it sounds like for all intents and purposes, their relationship was pretty much over and non-functioning before he brought somebody over. You knew what kind of a dude he was when he laid his hands on your kid. Was it not bound to happen with him still hanging around? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.